thank you all for your brevity and for getting it back. Alberto Ibarguen has been here before, but I think that this is mainly a new audience, and so I think I should say a few more words about him in introducing him. I've known him since when he was the publisher of the Miami Herald and the El Nuevo Herald. And during his tenure there as publisher, the Miami Herald won 3 Pulitzer Prizes, not a bad record, and El Nuevo Herald won Spain's Ortega y Gasset Prize for excellence in journalism. He's a graduate of Wesleyan University, University of Pennsylvania Law School. He served in the Peace Corps in Venezuela's Amazon territory and was the Peace Corps programming and training officer in Colombia, based in Bogota. And after law school, he practiced law in Hartford, Connecticut, until he joined the Hartford Courant, then Newsday in New York, before moving to Miami. That's a brief list. Anybody in the foundation world knows that the Knight Foundation is singular in the world of foundations. It's really the only foundation in the country that focuses on journalism. There are others who, I think, mess around a little bit with it, but none for which it is the primary mission. And they defined the mission of the foundation as working with, I think, is it 20, how many, is it 26? 20
well,
communities.
Journalism will do anywhere in the United States.
Anywhere. But working particularly with the cities or metropolitan areas in which the Knight brothers had owned papers, basically. In any event, the Knight Foundation has really been positioned to do an extraordinary amount of really good work. They work closely with community foundations in the cities in which they concentrate, and as he said, they do all kinds of journalistic things nationally. And he's going to talk a little bit about the foundation. We were talking briefly in my office before we came here, and the title of his speech really focuses on abiding by donor intent, basically. And I'd like him to tell us a little bit about what that means in terms of the actual decision-making within the Knight Foundation. But in any event, it's an honor to have Alberto back. I think this is maybe his 3rd or 4th talk for Ferg over the years. And he loves the students. He always, Bill Adair actually, he has a lock on him first, I think. And one of the things that Alberto always does is speaking for Bill's class, which he did this afternoon before today. So in any event, Alberto, welcome. It's an honor to have you here, a pleasure to see you, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Joel. It really is fantastic to talk to Bill's class, because every time I do it, I just come away with it's a lot of fun, and I come away with a lot of hope that group of smart people are going to attack the problems we have screwed up. So you always leave with a good feeling about it. I'd wanted to talk a little bit about evolving to stay relevant and honor donor intent. So when Joel has over the years challenged my thinking and provoked my thinking about spend downs versus perpetual foundations, whether you should structure it in a way where the donor has tremendously more engagement and involvement in the distribution of the assets than if the donor sets up something that is meant to go on for a significant period of time, nothing is really perpetual.
Correct.
But we pretend it is when we talk in these terms, and I am really a very strong advocate of the perpetual model. I think on the spend downs you can have all of the you've got the donor certainly has more control. The donor can bring a really critical sense of urgency to the execution. I find spend downs to be more efficient places. I find them to be places where there's just significantly less complacency, and that's not really meant as a criticism of my colleagues, but it just, there's a real, the clock's ticking and the donor's there and he's saying, come on, I want results, I want results, I want results. Typically, not always, but typically. So how do you get that outcome over output attitude in a perpetual foundation? That's the challenge that I think we have at Knight or at any other of these presumably ongoing organizations. But if you're interested in transformational change, it seems to me it's hard to beat the privilege or the luxury or the fact of the kind of flexibility, the kind of long-term investment that you can have when you're managing a small or large endowment, but doing it in the context of a private foundation. If you're interested in transformational change, honestly, if you're interested in funding projects, I don't think it makes a damn bit of difference whether it's perpetual or whether it's spend down or whether it's 5 years or 15 years or 20 years. You're funding projects and you're going to do good things. And I think we've had periods of time at Knight when, and let me just talk about Knight so I won't offend anybody. I'll just talk about our stuff and offend myself. But it is. I think we probably audit as much and as well as anybody. In fact, I'm quite sure of it. We have a really very, very active auditing practice during the life of grants, not even just after, but during the life of grants. And I find very, very little evidence of stunningly little of people not doing roughly what they said they would do. The question is, did they have the impact that we were looking for? Did they actually achieve the outcome? Were we structured in a way that allowed us to focus on the outcome instead of on the output? We are fantastic in philanthropy at output. We can tell you, and I've actually literally read $10,000 grant brief write-ups, summary write-ups that basically promised a change in the world for 10 grand. And I thought, my God, this is just, on its face, this has to be rejected, however good it may be, because you can't possibly have that kind of a claim. But output is the specialty of most professional philanthropy. I'm interested in outcome. And I don't think you can have transformational community outcome unless you have time, unless you have tenacity, unless you have the willingness to stick to it. And so I'd like to talk about a couple of examples in our experience that where I think we've shown in different aspects of the operation, the organization, the business, where this has the critical factor has been the use of time. To make transformational change, you've got to deal with with discovery, vision, courage, skill, inclusion, and tenacity. And that's sort of axiomatic. You've got to deal with the facts as they are, not with as you wish they were. And so I think of it in sort of journalistic terms of discovery. You've got to have the vision of what could be. Somebody sees something and interprets it one way, and somebody sees an entirely different possibility on the same set of facts. The courage to put it out there, the skill to apply it, inclusion, if you're looking for change in our democracy, I think that's an absolutely essential requirement. And then tenacity, this is the willingness to stick to it. Bill Drayton, who is, I guess, most famous, he's famous for lots of things, for running Ashoka, used to tell me that he thought foundations ought to begin their evaluations 5 years after the last grant. Because that's when you would figure out whether you really had some serious transformation. It was only some serious transformational impact, and that's when you'd begin to know. But you don't need to look too far or too long into the future to see what do really successful VCs do. How do they spend their time? How do they what are they in the life of an investment that a venture capitalist will make? They will spend, and most of them will tell you, they will spend a fraction of that time in the lead up to the investment. The rest of the time is invested in the outcome. The rest of the time is invested in working with that investment to make sure that it's successful. Why? Because otherwise they don't make money. Otherwise they've missed an opportunity to improve their business. In philanthropy, since all excellence, I find, is in private philanthropy, all excellence is internally driven, our money is often treated as free, as if it were free. I can guarantee you, because I was in their business, it wasn't free to Jim and Jack Knight. And I can guarantee you that, however, that in most of the conversations that you have with foundation program officers, when you talk about whatever kind of program, and it's especially stark when you talk about it in context of multi-partners, public-private partnerships, where you have, and I'll take as an example the work we've done. Jim and I were just in Akron, Ohio. When that started, we had philanthropy, we had local philanthropy, national philanthropy, we had the city, we had the federal government, and we had a private developer. And we asked a colleague of a friend of ours in Miami who happens to be a developer, I said, well, why don't you just come in and listen in on the conversation and tell me what you think? And he listened, and he asked a question which I thought was really interesting. He asked our program officer, well, how much is we were going to fund the theater, the city was going to subsidize some housing, the developer was building some buildings and building some new housing downtown, the federal government was kind of in all over the place, and our friend, the developer, said to the program officer, well, how much money is the developer going to make? And he said, well, I'm not really sure. I'm not sure that's been disclosed. And he said, well, then you don't know the cost of your money. You don't know how much he values your money at. How can you negotiate with him if you're not aware of what his potential profit is going to be in this? You are helping him make whatever profit he's going to make, because you're going to pay whatever it was, $4 or $5 million for the number of amenities that we thought of as really good community binding kinds of activities. But we had not really thought of the value of our money. What is the value of our money, and how would we play that out over a period of time? And that, in my mind, began making me think that maybe we had really been focused in the wrong part of the experience. We had been focused on trying to make the best and most reasonable business plans, and then still putting them out there for them to go ahead and happen however they happen, without thinking that here I have this incredible body of knowledge of venture capitalists who were doing a similar thing, except they were doing it for money profit. We wanted to do it for community benefit, but it's still being an investor. We are social investors when we start playing in the transformational sphere, and we are in the process at Knight of a real transformation in terms of how we focus and how we spend our time as program officers, and where we expect to be spending our time going forward in every single one of the programs. Not so, and change, and that causes changes in terms of foundation management all the way up to the board. We have changed radically how we have what happens at our board meeting. Our initial board experience was a board that at one time even called itself the Distribution Committee. And the board, because there was such a tie with the Knight brothers, the board would get a memo from the local publisher, and the publisher would say, these are 5 good grants in my community, and then the Knight board would send them $5,000, $50,000, whatever it was. We're a long way from that to the point where our focus is on a discussion of the work itself and what we're doing and how it's moving forward, as you might in any other kind of venture capital operation. We're not there yet. It's still much easier to discuss the details of a grant. It's still much easier for somebody who wants to show that he or she read the material to say, you know, the salary of the assistant director at the United Way seems a little high. I'm not making that one up. That happened a long time ago, but it actually happened. And I thought to myself, there has got to be a higher level discussion here. It really does start, though, with how practical are you, how close are you to the, in my mind, how close are you to the way, in our case, the Knight brothers ran their business. I've evolved a structure that has 26 communities, because that's what they had at the time that Jim Knight died. We have 18 of them where we work through community foundations. 8 we work with resident program directors, and we have a program in the arts in community. Our arts program is pretty significant by foundation standards, but only works in the communities where we actually have offices, and we have 2 programs in journalism and in research of the impact of technology on media and democracy, where we are actually not bound by geography in any significant way. Jim Knight and Jack Knight ran their business in a fairly unique way. Jim ran the business side, and he ran a fairly common operation, community to community. Jack Knight had all the reporters, all the editors reporting to him, not to a business manager or to a publisher, but reporting to Jack Knight, whose favorite title was editor-in-chief of Knight newspapers, and then later Knight Ridder. His view was Detroit is not Biloxi, and Biloxi is not Miami, and neither of them are San Jose. And they deserve to have, and our model is that they would have a newspaper that would actually reflect the community. And Jim Knight's view was, yeah, but I can save a lot of money by buying paper and buying ink by the barrel for 26 papers rather than one at a time. So they really had a very common sense approach to what is sort of the ultimate common sense business. If you think about it, it wasn't then that complicated. You went around town, you found out stories, you wrote them up kind of interestingly, printed them on cheap paper and sold them for a song. And if it got too much more complicated than that, you were doing something wrong. You made a ton of money. There's a reason why we have $2.7 billion in our endowment 40 years after Jack died, 30 years after Jim died. It was an amazing, amazing American business that they ran and they knew how to run. And while the world has changed in the time we have evolved, the lesson to me of the way they ran it, with the focus on community, the common sense approach to the business, the attitude toward technology. Jack Knight was editor of all of his newspapers before World War II because of this newfangled thing called the telephone that was technology that was applied to his being able to be formally the editor of all of his newspapers. In 1948, there's a German engineering magazine that talks about the American publisher John S. Knight, who was talking back then of faxing his newspapers to his customers. Now, it didn't quite turn out that way, but directionally, he was not wrong. At a time when 99.999% of the world didn't know what a fax was, and this guy was already thinking, I could do this. They lost their shirts investing in early internet before there was color, sound, or motion. Just when it was just static, and nobody who can read. But it hadn't quite worked. But Knight was a really significant investor, and their attitude, as expressed by the leadership of the company at the time, was we think that's where our customers are going, and we want to be there waiting for them when they get there. It didn't quite work out that way, but that was the attitude. So I take that attitude, and I say, and I felt in 2005, we are Knight Foundation. We are the biggest journalism foundation in the country. Actually, it was easy to do that in 2005 because we were the only journalism foundation in the country. And we don't have a clue. We just don't have a clue. We had just done almost 24 endowed chairs of journalism to teach the best people in the best universities for jobs that may or may not exist, and worse, teaching them best practices for a world clearly we did not understand. And I say clearly because I'd just been a publisher and was a really successful publisher, and I didn't have a clue, and I saw that none of us had a clue, and so I thought, hey, what we do have is this mound of cash. So we're going to say, we don't know what we're doing, but maybe you do, and maybe you have ideas. And so we decided to start offering. We decided to start doing challenges and say, okay, here it is, $5 million in the first year for ideas to use digital platforms to deliver news and information to geographically defined communities. And it's important that you remember that our focus is still geographically defined communities. Why? Because that's still how democracy is structured. Our democratic republic is based on geography. Congressional districts state house districts, mayoral districts. We're still running things as if geography mattered. For the first time in the history of the Republic, however, we have completely decoupled the way that we inform ourselves with the way that we manage our public business. And so we are consistently and everywhere electing people that we don't know, whose policy positions we only know about from their press releases. And how am I so sure of a statement like that? Because I know damn well that the jobs have been eliminated and the work is not being done. I'm exaggerating, sadly, slightly. But the fact is that the job is not being done because the reporters aren't there. And I am not pining for the days of newspapers, nor am I wishing that we could go back to, whatever it was you think we were at. No, not at all. I'm just saying if you're going to have an effectively run democratic republic, you absolutely must have a well-informed citizenry that is also actively engaged. And that means it has to be inclusive, and it first means it has to be informed. And so that's what we're trying to do. And I said this in Bill's class earlier. To me, the great philosopher in this is Yogi Berra, who saw it while he was playing baseball. And he said, if the fans don't want to come to the ballpark, nobody can stop them. And the fans, think about it. If the fans don't want to come to the ballpark, nobody can stop them. And who can stop them when they were going to another news ballpark? Who can stop the advertisers when they decided Google does a better job of reaching what I want to reach? Who can stop the fans when they decide they'd rather look at TikTok? Well, too bad for you, but you got to learn how to tell serious news on TikTok, using TikTok. I don't care what it is. If it's where the fans are in a democracy, they're the ones who are still going to vote, so we'd better figure out how to get them reasonably well informed. I really don't think we should think about the basis of this too much more than that. How you do it, that's of course where folks like Jim Brady come in, who runs our journalism program. I think we're just amazingly lucky to have him, given his experience and his no nonsense kind of attitude. But figuring out how we do it, we can talk, and I'll wind this up because I've got 3 more pages of notes here. I could talk for about 5 hours on the projects that we do, on the different ways that we approach different pieces of this, the ways that we approach the questions of mis and disinformation. I'd love to have as much discussion as you want about what are the ways we should consider regulating ourselves. What are the ways that we should consider evaluating news? Should we be jumping out the window, or should we remember Elizabeth Eisenstein's work at the University of Michigan on the printing press and the Reformation, when she pointed out that before the monks before the printing press, the Gutenberg mechanized the Chinese invention of the printing press, the monks would stamp their imprimatur and on the 1 or 2 manuscripts a year that a monk might do, and there was order, and you knew it was true because it said so. And then all of a sudden, any Tom, Dick, or Martin Luther could print whatever they wanted to print. And nobody knew for 100 years. Yeah, how the hell do you figure out what's true and what's not? And the kind of thing that they were worried about, I think, is exactly the things that we're worried about now. The people who are controlling were saying, well, you can't, how can you regulate this thing? It's too fast. It's overwhelming. The volume of information that is suddenly available in Renaissance Europe, the speed with which this stuff is getting disseminated. Of course, we're on hyperdrive of some sort now with, and I'm not making light of it. It's a terribly difficult thing. But the fact that it's more and the fact that it's fast just simply means to me that we've got to figure out how to invest more and better and smarter in, maybe it's in artificial agents that are simply much faster and much better at helping us figure out how to deal with much faster and much more easily disseminatable, if that's a verb, news and information. These are just, in my mind, are just simply technical problems. The question is, what are the prices we're willing to pay? What are the limitations? Some folks, Amy Klobuchar, somebody I respect very much, whose father was a journalist, so that makes her automatically a good person. She's talked about antitrust, and maybe it's antitrust. Maybe that's the way of doing it. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure I want American companies to be working under an antitrust regime that European countries aren't, or that Chinese companies aren't, or that anybody else's aren't, in a world that is global. And that is a world that is global. So maybe that's it, maybe not. Maybe we do it with some kind of regulation. That scares the hell out of me, given my background in Latin America, and I think of ministries of truth and governments that will be happy to tell you what to think and what's true and what isn't true, and it's not what I would especially prefer. Maybe it's questions of liability, which actually, as a recovering lawyer, I actually do kind of like. The world has worked pretty well with theories of product liability, and that's not to say that all of a sudden anybody can bring a lawsuit or collect, and never mind collect. And would it be more costly? Yeah, it probably would be more costly, but it might make somebody think twice, or maybe might make somebody invest 3 times as much in agents of artificial intelligence that will help them, or maybe even in Bill Adair's products, that will help them figure out what's true and what isn't, before you go ahead and publish it to the world, and have somebody, like the fellow who shut up Comet Pizza in Washington, who read it, that Hillary Clinton was supposed to be running a child pornography ring in the back of the Comet Pizza, and he went there, as far as I can tell, believing it. He read it on internet, and he went there and shot the place up. He didn't kill anybody, thank goodness. But should there be liability? I'm not so sure there shouldn't. There isn't now, and there isn't by law. But that's something that I think we ought to think about. So what we've done is, in the last 4 years, we've developed, and this goes back again to the sort of long-term kind of investment. What we've done is go back and we've invested, as of this weekend, about $65 million, maybe closer to $70 million, in disinterested research from scholars that are on the right, in the center, and on the left, into the impact of technology on media and democracy. That's something that, if Knight had been a spend down and we had finished our investments back in the year 2000, nobody would have even thought about doing something like this. Instead, today, we've got centers at Carnegie Mellon, George Washington, NYU, North Carolina, here at Chapel Hill, University of Washington. We've got scholars from literally all over the country. We just agreed this weekend to add some in Texas and Clemson. And the point of this is that our intent is that over a long period of time, we will stick with this. We do this with journalism. We've been it's only been 16 years, but we've been doing all manner of things, trying to move existing news operations and supporting brand new operations to inform community on digital platforms. There are very few digital news operations that you'll mention that we haven't funded, sometimes even as an original funder like Texas Tribune, sometimes as a secondary funder like MinnPost in Minneapolis, or Voice of San Diego, or Sahan Journal in St. Paul, or New Haven Independent, or here in North Carolina, we intend to be an early funder of a similar news operation that Darren and Joel have been involved with starting. We're in Baltimore. We're in Salt Lake. We have got to take a very, very long view of this. And therefore, it is really essential that we have an organization that allows that really long view, because we still, for all the funding, we still don't have the answers. I'm not sure what my time is, but I'm pretty sure I'm probably over it. I just say that we take the same approach in our community funding. It tries to be practical. It tries to be long-term. It tries to leverage or accelerate what we find in community, rather than go out and find who's willing to do whatever crazy cockamamie idea we came up with in the office. I find that has almost always led to bad funding. But if we find somebody actually doing something that they're passionate about, that is authentic in the community, that's from the beginning, that's a better bet. We've done that with Arts in Miami. I just absolutely delight in the stories that I read now about Miami being an overnight arts hub, and Miami being an overnight tech hub. Well, baloney. Nothing overnight about it. There's a lot of stuff that's happening in Miami in the arts, and there is a lot of stuff that's happening in Miami in tech, and a lot of it is happening because for a long time, a number of us were working and funding in those areas. For 10 years, were funding co-working spaces. We brought in Endeavor. We brought 500 startups. We were helping to fund some investment operations. We brought in Girls Who Code. We brought in Black Tech Week, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you sort of you sow and you water, and it wasn't just us. There were a bunch of people, and then one day lightning strikes, and our new mayor, because our old mayor didn't seem to think there was a role for the government to promote this sort of thing. Our new mayor decides tech's a thing, and he sends a tweet to somebody in Silicon Valley who is thinking of relocating, and the tweet says, "How can I help?" And the thing goes viral. And all of a sudden, there's all these people are talking about Miami Tech this and Miami Tech that at the same time. And this, some of you will like Malcolm Gladwell, some of you may not. What you got to say, the guy's very clever in the way that he approaches major transformational events. They happen because of currents that are going on. One thing's happening here, something else here, and then you have the event that changes everything going forward. I think in terms of Miami, I think of Miami as a place that was a winter vacation for rich Northerners, and otherwise wasn't that big a town. And then in the 1950s comes air conditioning, which makes Miami a year-round, easy place to be. In the 1950s, jet propulsion really takes hold, and that makes Miami that close. It used to be a long ride down to Miami. And in 1959, Cubans. And so the whole thing turns inside out with jet propulsion, air conditioning, and Cubans, and Miami becomes a thing. Now, that's an absolutely incorrect theory, the explanation of the whole thing. But there's something there about this business of the currents happening. And I think I look now at our being the tech hub that all these publications are writing about. Serious publications, and it's true. We've got this guy bringing down Citadel with billions of dollars. Thoma Bravo, more billions of dollars, more hundreds of people coming to work and live in Miami. We've got dozens and dozens and dozens of entrepreneurs, and I think, yep, we were sowing, we were watering, we were sowing, we were watering, and then all of a sudden comes the tweet, comes COVID, comes all digital tech, and people who can live anywhere are looking for a place where they can be outside, as opposed to, in a big city, and they read about us and they decide to come down. In the meanwhile, we have evolved to stay relevant. We've evolved our program. We no longer do co-working spaces. Plenty of people are funding co-working spaces. We're funding engineering at the University of Miami, FIU, and Miami-Dade College. If you had asked me when we started this, would I be funding engineering? What? I don't even know what an engineer does. No, we would not have. I kind of do, but this was not in the plan. You have to let yourself be guided by the market, by what and how do I know that? Because the entrepreneurs that were coming down said, "Hey, this is great. We drank the Kool-Aid, but we need engineers, and they're expensive, and there aren't enough local." And so I thought, well, 2 and 2 is still 4. Let's go talk with the 3 schools of engineering that we've got. And now, $27 million in the last couple of years is not all the money in the world, but it's a start. And they have really done a very good job of ginning up what they already were doing. So it's not like this was brand new. It's what they already were doing. And last, I'd say, same thing on the arts. I'll talk to you about that if you want. And even in the way that we manage things, it is long-term, is absolutely necessary for the kind of change that we have caused. We started out in 2005, which is when I first came in, and we had just made an investment on something called GenX 360, which is a fund that is run in part by a friend of mine, Lloyd Trotter, who I knew and is African American, and that was an investment. And I got invited to attend a conference of African Americans who are members of public company boards, and would I come and talk about the management of endowments? Oh, sure, no problem. I said, new to the foundation. And it's a liberal foundation. I figured they had all kinds of stuff they had done. And so I called the CFO and I said, who is a link with our outside CIO, Chief Investment Operation. And I said, how much money have we got under management by minorities or women? And he said, $6 million. And I said, no, I don't mean just the thing with Floyd. I mean, at that time, it was 1.9 billion. I said, out of the whole thing. And he said, yeah, $6 million. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. So I figured, Houston, we have a problem. My other problem was that our chairman of the investment committee was John Rogers, who was not only the one who was inviting me to the conference, who was African American, but who was chairman of our investment committee. And I called John and I said, "Excuse me, but I just got here and you're chairman of the investment committee. What's going on?" And he said, "Well, I think this is something you ought to address." And I said, "Okay, I can address it, but when I do, I don't want to hear a peep out of the investment committee. And that's your job." And he said, and so between the two of us, so what we did was absolutely intentional. We said, the first thing you had to do is examine our premises, discovery. All things being equal, we'll give a nod, sure, to a minority or a woman firm. Great. What does all things being equal mean? Oh, you have to have owned the shop for 25 years, 20 years. Highly, actuarially speaking, highly unlikely that that was going to happen a lot in the field of money management at that point. And I said, well, what if all things being equal is you have 20 years of experience or 15 years of experience of actually making money, and maybe you've only owned the firm for 5 years. Oh, well, that would be different. So, well, why don't we try that? And so we started figuring out how do we make money, because that's when we first went to the investment managers. I said, well, you're going to have to be prepared to lose money. And I said, no, I'm not. We have this whole side of the foundation where all we do is give money away. And then we have this other side where all we do is make money, so we have more money to give away. And if you can't figure out who are women or blacks or Hispanics or Asians who can make money, then maybe somebody else can. And so I said, oh, no, we'll do that. So long story short, we're now at over $1 billion. Our endowment's 2.7. We're over $1 billion, actually about evenly split between diverse and women money managers. They do a phenomenal job, of course. They make as much money. The only ones that have been let go have been people who didn't make money, just as if they were traditional, as a way of saying white male, with no offense intended. And we've also started, which I would never have thought about, we've started doing research into the field. This is a field of enormous potential impact. So who manages the endowment of private foundations? Billions and billions of dollars of private foundations. And so we're now about to do our third or fourth study of private foundation endowment managers. Almost half of the big ones will not even talk to us. So there's a big empty space. But, so that's the glass half empty. But the glass half full is that we now have to make sure to keep our numbers up, because we've got some competition for who else has decided, hey, this thing works. This thing actually works, and we're walking our talk. So we're not ready to claim victory there, but I think we've made a real impact. I don't have it with me, I don't think, but we also, since I'm an old newspaper guy and I believe in advertising, we also take out an ad in the Wall Street Journal and an ad in the Washington Post whenever we do our surveys. And the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post ad is who discloses. Here are the 25 top private foundations. These are the ones who are willing to let you know who runs their money. These are the ones who, for whatever reason, decide they won't. And then the Wall Street Journal ad is a different audience. You've got to do your advertising to an audience. As a different ad, and those ads are, these are the 32 companies with whom we make money. So don't even think about telling me you don't know any. I just published it in the Wall Street Journal. And we've done that. And so this time, last year, actually beginning of this year, we did it for the 25 biggest private university endowments and the 25 biggest public university endowments, and they were even crummier than the private foundations, refusing to talk, and so that's just an encouragement. So we're on the public endowments. We're looking around for lawyers who don't know how to do a lot of public information work. I'm not sure how we're going to get on the private side, but these things take time, and I'll just leave that as my last example of why I'm such a fan of passionately executing on the donor intent that was directional but not prescriptive. They said, we want to work to inform and engage communities in this democracy, but you're going to have to change over time. They knew it was a long road, and they said, Jim and Jack, said, you not only may you change, you have to change the way you do it. And I'm proud to tell you, I think they were right.
Fantastic. Alberto, say a word about the Foundation's commitment to intercollegiate athletics.
Sure. Some nearly 30 years ago, Lexington's one of our communities, and about 30 years ago, those of you who were reading newspapers at the time know that there was a big scandal that involved money and influence in Kentucky basketball, and that led to a lot of people wringing their hands about the influence and corruption of university athletics. Knight Foundation's then president, Creed Black, got together Father Theodore Hesburgh from Notre Dame and Bill Friday from Chapel Hill, from the University of North Carolina system, and they became the vice chairs of the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics, which continues to this day. And the Knight Commission, I'd say with great pride, has influenced the shift in power from athletic directors to presidents of the university, on the theory that they had a broader view and were more likely to maintain the balance of mission and the game, and education mission, and the necessary money issues. We were absolutely involved in the increase in academic standards that qualify universities for playing in postseason games, and it should be an embarrassment to everybody in this room that it took years to get those standards, even to the, in my opinion, to the low level that they're at now, that it took years to get there. We've been involved in the recent changes or the discussion of recent changes in the management of intercollegiate athletics with the big football schools, and we've been involved in lots of the discussions about name and likeness, the paying of athletes. For all of that, we've had a really stellar commission led by Nancy Zimpher, who used to run the New York State University system, by Len Elmore, whom you may have seen as a player and as a commentator, and by Arnie Duncan, who was the former Secretary of Education, and with a terrific staff. And we have funded them 100% all the way, on the theory that this is a place where Americans will come, where the fans will come to that ballpark to talk about those issues. And the issues are issues of education, of values, of ethics, and of commerce. And those are the issues that interests us in this society.
Well, it's always been interesting to me, that the Knight Foundation is the only foundation that has paid any attention to this, actually. And it's been doing it from the beginning. And it is, as you said, it's very slow going,
Yeah.
difficult. And that's, of course, a lot of the problems that foundations have to deal with are difficult problems all the time. And that's one of the reasons that perpetual foundations, presumably perpetual foundations, are better off than short-term foundations, because they can actually put the money in as long as they want to.
And I'm hopeful that some will. We're actually talking with Arnold off the record, although you're recording this, so just erase that piece. That maybe that's a possibility. But in journalism, gosh, if we had just done some projects back in 2007, 8, 9, 10, Emerson Collective didn't even exist.
Correct.
Arnold wasn't taking a look at it. MacArthur was doing something completely different. Now MacArthur's president is talking about maybe we should raise a fund to buy media outlets until we figure this out, or as we figure this out.
Good idea.
That's crazy thinking for...
He's coming to speak here this year.
Well, ask him about it. Tell him why he hasn't done it yet. He used to be our chairman at Knight Foundation, so I feel free to, now that he's going off the board, I feel free to needle him. He's absolutely wonderful. But the point is, these things take their time.
Yeah. Okay, so questions from the floor. And you can you go.
Or from the audience, online.
Also, let me invite the Zoom audience also to ask questions. You're entitled to it. And those of you with or without pictures on our screen.
So great presentation, really enjoyed it, and really appreciate how often you were talking about capital, both influencing the endowment side, but then also your reference to venture capital. Prior to working Maternal Children's Health, I was in private equity, so I have a capital markets mindset. One of the things that venture capitalists focus on is how do they bring the people they're investing in to get them ready for the next check that's usually larger. So I'm wondering how you think about where you sit in the capital stack to then try to motivate and influence other big check writers that might be able to come in behind you once you de-risk that investment.
I think, well, first of all, we need to talk later, because I think maybe there's a consulting gig in this for you, because I'm not sure how we should do that with our folks. In the first place, we have a terrific group of program directors, most of whom come from a background of social service, some government, very few with business backgrounds. So this is not instinctive for a lot of people until you start breaking it down in terms of the time. If you think about it, we're no different on a 5-year grant or a 3-year grant than a VC in terms of the amount of time we're going to be related to this effort. We're no different in terms of trying to get other people to also fund it. We're no different in trying to get them, and Jim actually is really on the journalism side is the one who's dealing with this maybe the most. We're no different in trying to get the grantee to be able to claim that next check. Sometimes, many times it doesn't happen. Sometimes it does, and it happens, I think, in the same kind of way as with venture capital. You find the necessary people with the skill. Remember, skill is at the very center of my 6 little requirements for transformational change. If you don't have it, get it, bring it in. Whether it's skill development for our folks in spotting and in supporting or skill development for the grantee. Sometimes it's simply working hard to get that lucky. Sometimes it's finding. I'd say there's always an element of the choice in the beginning, and I'll tell you and I probably shouldn't say names, but man, what the hell? So there was this organization called The Well in Akron, Ohio, and we do downtown development in Akron. And Sam Gill, whom you know, who's spoken at this seminar, and I beg your pardon? The Knights were from Akron, yes. And so Akron is a big community for us. And but we were working. But Sam and Kyle Kudachiv, who's our program director, came with a suggestion that we fund this organization called The Well. So don't come on, don't give me a story. This is, you just like these people, and you want us to get into low-income housing, and we don't know anything about low-income housing. I know, I used to be a legal aid lawyer, so I at least have visited low-income housing. You haven't even done that. I probably shouldn't have said that, but I said so. No, I think this makes no sense at all, and it's not downtown, and so they know about tenacity, and they just kept on coming back and saying, no, this is, you got to think about not just the immediate downtown, but the areas around it, and you've got to have the larger sense of the neighborhoods. And so, okay, well, that's sort of an argument. And so we moved, and so finally they made me go with them to go to The Well. And there are these 4 amazing, wonderful people who were the people who ran The Well. And they outlined a business that kind of made sense. And they talked about sort of gaining market control of the low income, of the housing piece in this part of the neighborhood, because they had the hospital on one side and they were doing this kind of housing, and they had Goodyear on the other side, and they had that, and they had they knew who the people who were flipping were, and they knew name and last name and probably social security number of the slumlords. They were on it. At the end of which I said, listen, I think we ought to double down, and I'm going to call some people at this bank that I knew. Because Mel Martinez had moved over from HUD to being at J.P. Morgan Chase, and I thought, what better could we do than have J.P. Morgan Chase be involved in low-income housing in Akron? This is not maybe at the top of their priorities, but this should be something they should do. And the guy said no, at which point I knew we had the right guy. No, because this was in development, they hadn't proved it, they didn't have enough expertise, they hadn't done enough houses, they hadn't done enough administration, they hadn't had enough failures, they hadn't had enough. And I thought, man, when the time comes, this is the place to double down. Time passes, a couple of years, and we get this thing called ARPA, and so I figured, okay, this is the moment to strike. So we offer $4 million. Again, it's not all the money in the world, but $4 million. The county is, and the city, and so they're all going to split. Everybody has advocates, and so the world doesn't have an advocate because they're doing low-income housing. And so we then offer, if the city will put up $4 million, we'll match. And that's a nice way to start a conversation. Hasn't quite happened yet, but by the time this is over, I'm really pretty confident we're going to have somewhere in the neighborhood of $16 to $20 million that will be added to this. That couldn't possibly have happened in the first place, and that these guys, not me, were smart enough. When I fall in love, I really fall in love, and I did. And they said, "Hang on, cowboy, we're not ready for this." And it's the kind of relationship that you should have with people you're investing in, with projects you're seeing evolve. The engineering thing was not unlike that. I wouldn't, in a million years, I wouldn't have thought of being a major funder in Miami of engineering training in Miami. It makes absolutely no sense, except it makes total sense given what happened in the market.
Other questions? Yes.
Hi, thank you. This is Alexandra again. Thank you for the presentation. Learned so much. I'm curious about, having been in the nonprofit sector and working with philanthropy, their language really matters, and I'm curious how you define transformation, and how do you internally prepare your organization to continue to evolve to meet your new or evolving strategy as it arises over time?
Well, I don't know how many hours you have, but you're asking really, really impossibly difficult. You're asking impossible questions. Really good ones, but really, really hard. And Jim, jump in. I need help. The truth is that my sense of transformation is where there's fundamental change, not when somebody's simply better off, because you can be better off doing the good work, which we've also supported, of food kitchens, for example. But transformational is funding an organization like the Miami Partnership for the Homeless, where they not only do the food kitchen, which does the immediate necessary job of clothing, feeding, but where people have legal services, access to education, access to job services, and so forth, in a contained universe where people who are in a very fragile state of homelessness are able, without the kind of risk that says, here's a chit, they're waiting for you across town, go take 3 buses, and maybe you'll find it. But sort of common sense, where they fundamentally change, and where they have had enormous success at getting people stabilized and back in their own. That's transformational. The other one is good. I can't say no. And if it's my own money, I do give. If it's Jack Knight's money, I want a plan. I want to know what else we're going to do. How do we build on this? In journalism, it isn't enough for me. It just absolutely isn't enough for me to talk in terms of we're gonna give you some money so you can start this project, or you can hire somebody to cover a beat that I think you should cover. So what? If you don't have a plan for how you're going to continue it later, if you then change the way you cover because you've engaged, like with Documenters in Chicago, which at one point we were I think the principal funder of, which actually made me kind of nervous because we shouldn't be that big a percentage of. But if you can change the way people in a community act, and the way the way that the business is done, that you've engaged community people, you've trained and engaged community people in fact gathering, then engaged journalists from the same town in the writing and then publication, and you end up producing, I think, a fundamentally you have a fundamentally different news process than others. Should that concern everybody? Yeah, sure. It's not the tried and true. We know about the tried and true. We know about that other structure. But damn, this is a way of getting to communities that other structure consistently left out, and this is a way of engaging. Not just left out in terms of news, but it's a way of engaging neighborhood people in a way. And yeah, you know what? They don't have the sophistication of a Northwestern graduate reporter, but the reporter that comes in, I don't mean to pick on Northwestern, that comes in from Columbia, or God forbid, from Duke, comes in and doesn't have the local knowledge, doesn't know that every time that person opens her mouth, you divide by half. Or that every time somebody else talks, that's somebody that generally, why? Because they're from there. So I think change that's permanent, change that will happen after we stop writing the check.
I was just going to add to that, too. I think sometimes transformational change means going backwards before you go forwards. I think in the media business, I've been on the digital side since 1995, and organizations missed 1,000 opportunities to rethink the way they did things because they didn't want to go backwards in revenue. They didn't want to go backwards in staff size. They didn't want to go backwards. But had they done that at the time, they'd be much better off than they were today. So I think transformational change means doing something that almost every muscle in your body is saying don't do because it doesn't feel familiar to you, but is the right thing to do. And I think that's where we look to, that's why we fund sustainability as a primary goal. To Alberto's point, if somebody comes and says, can you give me 5 reporters to cover this topic? You know what you're going to be coming back for next year? 5 reporters again, because you're not thinking of any way to pay for these 5 reporters. And at the end of the day, we would like to give the money that goes to that organization to the next great entrepreneur, and not continue to give it to the same organization that's not coming up with a plan to pay for its own operations. So transformation to me really requires like being very uncomfortable, but doing it anyway because it's the right way to get where you eventually want to go.
Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time. But so I think that what I want to do is to thank Alberto for coming. You can see why we invite him back. He thinks right, and he gets things done, and other people have tried and don't succeed with. And it's he set a standard for the foundation thinking that I think is beginning to happen in a lot of foundations. But this is exemplary in that respect. So, and you may, I don't know, some of you may have come last year for the president of the what? Sam, yeah, and who is the new president of the Doris Duke Foundation. He was trained by him.
He wasn't trained, but he is absolutely fantastic. And Joel, I just want the record to show that I'm still sore they offered me.
Well, that's okay. All I can tell you is it's very rare that a speaker comes in, does an amazing job, and then thinks about the questions he was asked, goes home and writes a 200-page manuscript about how he sees philanthropy ought to be developed going forward. That's the kind of, you can see what Sam did in reflected in what Alberto is talking about. So in any event, let me thank you for coming today and mention the fact that the next speaker in this series for this fall is Allison Ranney. Allison started an all-women search firm in Chicago that focuses on people of color, identifying people of color for corporate CEO positions, foundation CEO positions, and she's done a spectacular job. And given, some of you know about the Sanford School, and the dean of the Sanford School made the issue of diversity and equality a key focus of Sanford's decision going forward under her leadership. And it struck me that it would be useful to ask Allison to come down and talk about how she goes about recruiting in the minority community, and successfully. There are people who claim that they try and don't succeed. She tries it and does succeed. And so that's the next speech. It's in November the 2nd. And the last speech for the semester will be Antonia Hernandez, who is the president of the Los Angeles Community Foundation, which is a large community foundation, which she's been head of now for, I want to say 20-some years, and done a spectacular job in transforming that foundation. So that's really it for the day. It's great to see all of you here and come inside on such a day when everybody wants to be outside. But nonetheless, but particularly pleased in Alberto coming back to us and being willing to share his wisdom with us. And we hope you'll come back again.
Thank you. I look at your list, by the way. I'm just looking over your shoulder, and I look at your list. We have had some dealings with Allison Rainey. We had dealings with Jim Bildner. In fact, we gave him a grant at Draper Richards Kaplan, and he's working with one of the groups in Chicago that I just mentioned, Antonio Hernandez, of course, and also John Palfrey and Barbara Pickau are partners of ours. It's a small world. John was our chairman, so tell him that he did a good job.
I will definitely do. I'll tell him that you did a good job too. So thank you, everybody. Alberto, thank you.